Hi, hi there, Richard, and welcome. Richard, first of all, do you want to just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay, yeah, sure. So a little bit about me. So I've been in ordained ministry now for about sort of 26 years. Prior to that, I spent, yeah, I was ordained when I was 27, and I have a good plastic surgeon. Prior to that, I spent 2 years as a full-time youth and children's officer in a large team ministry prior to ordination. And before that, I went to art college and I was a professional photographer, so sort of a bit of a change of things. My ministerial career, for want of a better word, has predominantly been rural ministry. My curacy, like most people, I did in the urban setting of Didcot, in a fairly high church. I sort of come from what people would describe as the Anglo-Catholic tradition, though I would describe myself as a modern Catholic or Catholic evangelist. So that's sort of my background. But then after curacy, I thought about going into the armed forces as a chaplain, but my beloved wasn't very happy about that idea of me being away for so long. And then the other love I had was rural ministry, because when I was at theological college, I did a summer placement down in Cornwall with a lovely chap called John Ayling, who looked after 8 churches. And that really sort of said something to me. So and that's what I did. I went to a place called Shrivenham. I started with 3 parishes and ended up with 7. I was there for 18 years, quite a long time, but I joke, I never had to move. They just kept giving me more churches. The churches came to me. And then 2 years ago, once children had got through school and everything, I was up for a new challenge and was looking around for rural posts. And then this post came up, which was a little bit unique. The Salisbury Diocese had got a grant from the Church Commissioners to develop rural ministry and rural projects, which they called Rural Hope. And as part of that, they were going to employ 4 rural field officers, is what we're called. But I suppose really we're sort of rural missioners would be a more easy way of thinking it, to cover the whole of the diocese. And that's a half-time job. And then I also look after 2 small rural parishes for the other half of the job. And it's a time-limited job. It's 4 years here. We're about halfway through. And it's been very interesting, pandemic, accepting the pandemic situation. So that's where I am at the moment.
It could be a really interesting series of vlogs we could do about how to do mission and ministry and life in a pandemic, but that's probably another another blog somewhere. But
another broadcast.
One of the things I was thinking about is that I've never really done that much rural ministry. I've sort of tinkered a little bit from the sides, really. So I wanted to talk to somebody who was actually a practitioner. One of the things I've noticed is that our so often our default setting seems to be urban or suburban. Do you feel that's true for both church and possibly even society as a whole?
I certainly think that it is a challenge and a problem with, in a sense, leadership at a higher level. A lot of our senior church leaders and such like have come from an urban setting. As I say, I've experienced that myself. I think there's a lot to be learnt from that. But I think unless you've really sort of, I was going to say trod the boards or walked the mud in a rural setting, you don't quite understand the differences of it. However, that said, what is fascinating and something I've been looking at with some of my rural colleagues who do look after larger churches is that some of the models that you find of how you have to structure things in a larger church and in a rural setting are quite similar. So if you look after a big church where you've got sort of congregations of 400 plus and that sort of thing, it's impossible for the minister there to be, in a sense, the vicar or the minister to everybody. The minister then has to rely on finding their key leaders and disciples in their large churches who will, affect the ministry in that area. And that is true, or should be true, in rural churches. If you've got more than 5 or 6 churches, it's impossible for you to be the minister to everybody. So you need to develop a very similar thing where you are creating disciples who will sort of minister out. So there is some dovetailing between urban and rural, but I think the big difference is the fact that churchmanship can be all over the place. Whereas in an urban setting, you tend to know where a church is. It's either evangelical, it's either Anglo-Catholic, it's either middle of the road. But rural churches can be a bit of a mix, and often as there's not a ecumenical dimension sometimes in villages anymore because chapels and things have closed, you often find in your congregations you will have Anglicans, Baptists, Methodists, people from all sorts of different backgrounds. So there's differences like that.
Which actually is quite exciting, because I think too often we end up as Christians, we end up in what we call echo chambers, where we actually talk to people who think or do things the way we think or do things. And when I was in Salisbury, one thing I enjoyed was when we set up street pastors, we ended up having teams with people on them who will be like, sort of Pentecostal and Anglo-Catholics and sort of conservative evangelicals, all going out and serving and blessing people on the same night out. And I sometimes just think, I would love to be a fly on the wall with their little conversations, because they've got very different ways of being Christians, but there's no doubt that all of them love Jesus, and actually probably they've all got stuff they could learn from each other. And actually almost the rural context probably is a great thing of, actually we don't all kind of have the same likes and preferences, but we've somehow learnt to be family, which I think is something that we probably all can learn from a bit.
Yeah, and I think it's in a sense celebrating the great, what I've always described as the great treasure chest we have of Christian tradition. I don't think one particular tradition has the handle on everything, and it's been an interesting journey for me, a sort of journey of discovery. As I said, I became a Christian at boarding school, and that's, I think, partly also with the love of rural stuff, because I got sent away to North Devon, and I was from Slough originally, Slough and Windsor. But the sort of church we got at boarding school, the boarding school I had, that was quite high. Well, it was very high church, and then when I came home, it happened to be that my parish church was sort of not quite as high, but sort of similar, and that was sort of really the only experience of church I'd had. But then as a youth worker, when I started engaging in youth work, I met these odd people called evangelicals, and realised that, oh gosh, Christians worship in different ways and things like that. Some of it I found quite a jolt to the system, to be honest with you, and I thought, but as I got to know fellow Christians and things like that, I discovered, we've got this huge plethora of wealth of tradition and everything. Yeah. And I always feel we should unashamedly feel comfortable to dive into that particular chest. Mm-hmm. You might be true to your own particular, background, but I don't think there's any harm or anything wrong with dipping your foot in the water of another traditional style.
No, in fact, I think a lot of us have come the other way, actually, being brought up in the big evangelical or churches in the evangelical stream, and suddenly realised I can actually meet God in a different flavour, a different place. I mean, I think festivals like Greenbelt and those sort of things, where actually people mix together and you talk to people who aren't like you, can be really faith enriching. Interestingly, I was really interested in the thing you said about the idea of lay leadership and empowering people, and being at the heart of both some of the bigger urban churches, where they obviously need to work out how to pastor and mentor, encourage, bless, support one another better, and also being a bit of a backbone of rural ministry. And I was thinking, actually, that the idea of disciples who make disciples, about the body of Christ working as it ought to, actually, it's almost like the two, not opposite extremes, but the two very different places on the spectrum, but actually grasp something quite exciting about actually what it means to follow Jesus in a practical way. I think too often when we've been mid-sized church, we've had this idea of the vicar does it all, and actually this almost is the rural church got something to teach us about dispersed and equipped ministry, where people are doing the God stuff in their own context, which I think is really exciting. Sorry, that was there's a question there somewhere.
No, and I think it's really important, and I do think it's a problem. I mean, it's one of the things I've sort of experienced throughout all my ministry, but it's an interesting challenge in this diocese that that sort of old adage, father knows best or the vicar still does everything. And I was having a conversation with some of my team, rural field officer team yesterday, and I think one of the problems is, though it is changing, it's changing slowly. Training at theological colleges, or certainly Anglican theological colleges, even the ones that you would think would sort of be maybe a bit more lively and forward thinking, there is still this sort of notion of, you know, you're going to go out and you're going to be the vicar and you're going to be, it's all about you, rather than this sort of sense of a shared ministry, a collaborative ministry, which of course is the model that we find in the gospel. You know, Jesus doesn't go out, he sends the others out. And I'm also a Franciscan tertiary, and of course that was what St. Francis based his thing on, the gather, you know, of people going out together in pairs, that shared ministry. And I think it is a problem. And what's interesting is if you read some of the stuff and the research that people have done, churches that are successful, regardless of whether they're in an urban or rural setting, tend to have ministers who are very good at enabling other people and encouraging other people, and also not afraid of failure. Because I find that's one of the things that holds a lot of ministers back. They're terrified that if they let somebody else do it, it won't be done properly, or maybe how they think it should be done. And actually, yeah, or they'll do it better. And yeah, well, that's another thing.
I realised I have my own baggage.
Yeah, or do it better. And people can generally feel that as a threat. I mean, when I was a curate, I had a lovely training incumbent, Nicholas Gandy. He was a great guy, very Anglo-Catholic, but he was very community mission orientated in that sense. But I remember one of the sort of funny things now, you know, in the Anglo-Catholic tradition, how you sort of place your tat around the church and on altars is very, very important. And one of the first jobs I got as a curate was on Saturday night, I had to go and sort of set the church up, the altar up for service on Sunday morning. Something I'd done for years because I'd been a server and all of that. So I sort of agreed to do it, and I would honestly prefer to be down the pub with people on a Saturday night, but you know, duty calls. So I would go off and do this, spend about an hour setting everything up, and then when we would meet in the morning to do morning prayer, he'd sort of walk around the altar and he'd move everything by about 0.5 centimetre or an inch or something like that. It was set up exactly properly. Yeah. And after about 3 or 4 weeks of this, I turned to him and I said, Nick, I said, you know, I've set everything up properly, but clearly you like it in a particular way. Would you prefer to do it yourself? And he looked at me and he said, do you mind? So I said, knock yourself out, mate. I'm going down the pub.
But I think sometimes we need in those relationships that honesty to make it work. And actually, I think too often we have our expectations, somebody else's expectations, and we have all this. I think a lot of things don't happen just because there's a whole lot of elephants in the room. We don't say, "Oh, by the way, there's an elephant there."
Yeah. And I think for clergy, for ministers, there is this concern that you know, if other people are enabled, they will then sort of question, you know, well, what is my role, or, you know, that sort of thing. But I think in a sense, the key is we just have to go back to the Gospels and look at what Jesus did with the disciples. His key role was simply to love and nurture and to encourage, and occasionally when necessary, chastise, you know, those key people. And that is a huge job in itself and can be very rewarding. I've always joked that one of my saving graces was very early on in my ministry career, even as a youth worker. I learned that I was pretty rubbish at everything. But the one thing I seemed to be quite good at was finding people and persuading them to do stuff. So I've always tried to surround myself with very capable people. And it seems to have paid off because people seem to think I'm really good at stuff, but I'm not. I've just got a good team of people that get stuff done.
But it's actually realising that the kingdom of God is bigger than us, and I think that's something quite exciting, actually, as well. Just a couple of thoughts to come into land almost with this. I've got told off. I keep on saying "coming to land" as one of my phrases, so I need to find a new one. But just a couple of thoughts. If you were talking to a clergy person, first of all, or maybe even yourself when you first started out with rural ministry, what would be your three top tips, your three sort of advice you'd either give yourself or someone else thinking about exploring rural ministry? What would be your three key?
Yeah, I think first and foremost would be, in a sense, the real importance to nurture and foster your own relationship with God. Because one of the challenges in rural ministry, in a sense, is that and we've sort of touched on this, you can often be leading worship or doing things in a particular traditional spiritual style that doesn't necessarily feed you. But your job is to feed the people. And the lovely vicar I worked with in Cornwall on my placement, he looked after 8 churches, and he actually said this to me on placement. He said, it's very important, Richard, that you find something that will nurture you spiritually in your own relationship with Christ, because you'll be looking after lots of different churches and different people, and you can't make it all the way you would like it. So that's the first thing, and that sort of led me to join the Franciscans and have other groups and things. So my own spiritual life is sort of maintained, which means that I then feel I can sort of branch out and give to others, maybe in ways that wouldn't be natural for me, if you see what I mean. So nurturing your own. Sorry.
Is it possible if I quickly pause you just because somebody's just banging on the door? I'll be 30 seconds.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sure.
Sorry about that. I'll try and edit it up in a minute.
Yeah. And then I think the second thing would be learning to trust others, both in a sense finding colleagues, both lay and ordained, who quite possibly are wiser and more experienced than yourself, and be prepared to listen to them and learn stuff from them. I've been greatly blessed in my ministry that I've had a few wise sages, both lay and ordained, who have been people that I can honestly go to and ask their opinion and discuss things through and learn from them. And they are gifts from God. And sometimes they come in surprising forms. I mean, one person I had was, Shrivenham was a military base as well, big military college. I won't say his name, but he was a very senior retired military personnel. And he fitted all the sort of stereotypes and cliches that you could possibly imagine. He thought he sort of had a reserved seat in the church. And because I think in his career, he was used to turning up to things about a minute before they started. And he, of course, had some sort of junior bod reserve a seat for him and things like that. He sort of still thought that applied in the church. But when we started family services and things and new people coming in, he kept finding that his seat was taken. And he chastised the wardens about this several times. Then he decided to have a go at me. And I sort of was quite blunt with him. Working with military, you have to be sometimes. And I said, well, can I show you something? And I took him to my seat in the church. And I said to him, look, I don't mean to be funny, but you see this seat here? That's the only seat in this church that's reserved. And that was given to me by the bishop and the archdeacon. The rest of them, it's, come, first serve, get here early. Now, that could have backfired massively, but it didn't. He just looked at me and he realised I'd sort of jumped rank on him. And he said, right, yeah, fair enough, I get it. But after that, we became the best of friends. And he was one of those people I could ring up and say, his name was Gerald. And I would say, Gerald, can I come and have a chat? And I would sit down and he wouldn't flatter you, give you a very honest opinion about things and could be very encouraging. But I've always seen that relationship was a bit of a gift from God. He was an unlikely person, but it worked. So I think we need to learn to trust others and colleagues and understand that it's not, as you said earlier, it's not all about us. It's about this shared discipleship, and to accept that there are probably a lot of other people that can do stuff better than you. So let them do it. And then I think the final thing would be prepared to step out of your comfort zone. Because I think one of the dangers in church is that we get too comfortable. And this happens both, I think, in urban and rural ministry, is that you sort of set things up in a particular way. Worship is of a particular style. You get this with congregations. It's all comfy and cozy and nothing ever changes, And I think we've got to be prepared to be put out of our comfort zone. And again, the image for that is Jesus encouraging Peter to step out of the boat. I think that's a powerful image for all of us in ministry. Peter, as a fisherman, generations of fishermen before him, probably his father, his grandfather, they would have all told him, you don't get out of the boat unless it's absolutely sinking. It's the most secure thing there. All sailors and fishermen know that. And here comes Jesus walking across the water and tells Peter to do something that is so contrary to what he has learned and been brought up with all his life, that he really struggles. But he does do it in the end. And, well, what does he do? He makes a couple of steps and then he sinks. But that's not the problem, because then Jesus reaches down and lifts him up. But it was that experience of being able to step out of our comfort zones. And I think when you look at all of some of the issues that are going on in the church today and all the sort of politics sometimes, if we could learn to be more honest and open and be prepared to step out of our comfort zone sometimes, I think we would see a lot more flourishing in our churches. But we tend to veer on the side of wanting to be safe and comfortable. We're
often quite risk averse, aren't we? And status quo bias, and want to be comfortable. I think that those are all big things of the human condition, really. And actually, I think it's also something that's people say about older people being risk averse, whatever. But I think actually, having been a youth worker, actually it's a human thing. People wear the same thing and sit in the same seat every week, So there is a human thing there. And the last question, really, or last two questions actually. First, if you were a young family, say, or a person moving into a rural area, or even somebody maybe who lives in a rural area and is driving to a big urban church in the town centre, what would you say to them?
Well, it's interesting, and it's a very sort of common thing that happens. And I think partly in rural ministry, we need to sort of accept that, if you've got a young family with younger children and you live in a very small village and that church is, only able to put forward a prayer book, communion or evensong or something like that, that is going to be very difficult for the family to engage with that. And yes, maybe they do need to go elsewhere. But I think that's the thing about collaboration and cooperation. And this is something that I've been interested in how you can almost form twinnings between some of the larger urban churches and some of the large, smaller rural churches to sometimes, help share that manpower and do things. So I'll share two stories with you where that was an issue that we had and how it actually can be turned to a positive. So the first one was a tiny little village called Bourton that was one of my first churches. It was a classic sort of scenario where it had a sort of a congregation. It was a village of 200 people, but it had a congregation of about 12, 15 people. They were all very, very faithful. And it had two key people that virtually did everything. And I knew that they were going to retire and move to the Lake District. And I thought, well, when they go, the whole thing will come tumbling down, which is exactly what happened. The village wasn't particularly keen on doing things. But there were Christians in the village. And because we were only 10 miles from Swindon, most of those Christians were going to some of the larger churches in Swindon. So we had a few sort of meetings in the village and talked about things. And what was interesting, what came about there, both from the Christians who were there and the villagers, was that they felt they did want their church to be there and to do something. The Christians who worshipped in Swindon, they felt connected to part of that community, but we talked about this sense of mission as well. So that church in the end decided it didn't have Sunday services anymore. What they came up with, they said, could we have a service on a Saturday morning once a month? So it means we can all worship together here as a community, but then those of us who don't do church on a Sunday and go and do something else can go and do that. And those who do worship in Swindon can go. And that's exactly what they did. And that church went from a congregation of about 12 to 15 people once a month or twice a month to 40 people. And it became a real hub for the community. And the Christians that worshipped at the bigger churches, who could play guitars and all that sort of stuff, they helped with the worship in the smaller church. Yeah. So I think that's a really good thing. And then another church I worked with...
Resourcing to equip, isn't it?
Resourcing to equip.
If you can get that model right, where people are both resourced and able to serve, that's a beautiful kingdom thing.
And I know sort of larger churches, it's sort of out of vogue now, but some years back, church planting was the big thing. And, that did do some good things, but it also had a negative side sometimes, that it could sort of have a detrimental effect to the local churches in the area. I'm more of a fan of what I call church re-alivening, which is, form a relationship with if you are nearer a town, form a relationship with a bigger church and say, how can we work together to re-aliven God's work here in the rural area. So another church I worked with, which was a very odd, this was a very odd marriage, because this particular church was very high church. It was Anglo-Catholic. It was bells and smells. But we had an interesting couple there who were married. She had worked for Alpha for many years on the Alpha team and was an Anglican, evangelical Anglican. And her husband was a Roman Catholic, but sort of evangelical Roman Catholic. And they got me involved with Alpha and such like. But we decided we wanted to set up a sort of a Friday evening, early evening service that was going to be slightly, far more informal with music, have maybe a little bit of a charismatic touch to it as well. So it's very different from the worship this church did. But we had no expertise really to do this. So we got in touch with actually a free church, a filling station church that was based not too far from us. And one of the couple knew the minister there, or one of the ministers, quite well. And we had a whole conversation with them about whether they would be happy to come and help get this going. And we worked this all out, and they were brilliant, because they brought all the kit, and they brought their people and some of their congregation with us. So the very first service we had, there wasn't just 3 people and a dog. There were quite a lot of people there. It was sort of a bit of rent a Christian, and they came along. But it meant when the locals came in, they actually saw something that was a bit of a buzz. And the filler station church, they then taught and trained some of the locals who wanted to get involved how to sort of, do the kit and stuff, and they lent us some of the equipment and things. And what they did very graciously was then, over a sort of 6-7 month period, they started telling members of their congregation who were coming to stop coming, to slowly diminish. Yeah. So that in the end, what you had was really more or less an indigenous group there of locals. And we were immensely grateful for what they did. And I thought that was just a beautiful example of churches working together and the sharing of different traditions that can really enliven things.
Brilliant. That's a fantastic picture of church as body and as family resourcing one another. I'm going to nick the church re-alivening thing, because I think that's really, really profound. Thank you so much, Richard, for that.
Pleasure, Andy.
Could you, and last little point, really. I guess the thing is just, if you had like one, like in a tweet, what would you say about, sort of, you could sum up rural ministry, sum up your view on doing the Jesus stuff, if you could work it out in like as a tweet.
As a tweet, it would basically be this, which is, we are all on a pilgrimage with our Lord. Be prepared to continue walking forward. Know that he carries you and guides you through the narrow way, and celebrate with joy and sing when you're in the open way. We're in a narrow way at the moment of our pilgrimage, but the Lord is with us, and the way will open up again soon. So
brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's been brilliant. Sorry you had a couple of bangs on the door, but I'll see if I can edit it together to make it look smooth. Well, you'll look smooth. I'll try and make me look smooth. Thank you so much. You've been a star, and there's some great thoughts in there as well. That'll be brilliant, and actually really applicable for people who are in all sorts of ministry. Actually, there's lots of overlap there as well. So that's really exciting. Thank you so much.
Take care, Andy.
Yeah, take care. Thank you.